everyone, and welcome to Firstpost America. I'm Eric Ham, and we're live in the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. And today we've got the latest from Caracas, the C-suites, and New Delhi. But we begin with the latest headlines. China's foreign ministry says it will extend visa-free travel to ordinary passport holders from Russia on a trial basis. This comes after Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin held talks in Beijing a day after the SCO summit. The European Union's defense agency says the bloc's military spending is set to hit a fresh record of around $440 billion in 2025 as NATO members commit to ramp up spending under pressure from President Donald Trump. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky will meet European leaders in Paris on Thursday to discuss security guarantees to prevent Russian attacks if a peace deal with Moscow is in fact reached. The United Nations says an earthquake in eastern Afghanistan that's killed over 1,400 people could impact hundreds of thousands and warned of an exponential rise in casualties. Malaysia's communications minister says that authorities have summoned TikTok's top management over the social media company's alleged delays in tackling fake news on its platform. We began with the latest in the India-U.S. trade ties. Hailing India's GDP growth in the first quarter of the year, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said the world is ready to build a future with India, but challenges persist due to economic selfishness by some, an apparent reference to tariffs imposed on Indian goods by U.S. President Donald Trump. Speaking at the inauguration of the Semicon India event a day after returning from the SCO summit in China, Modi said that India has performed beyond every expectation and estimate, with growth visible across all sectors. With this momentum, he said India is well on its way to becoming the world's third largest economy.
एक तरफ जब दुनिया भर की इकोनॉमीज में चिंताएं हैं, आर्थिक स्वार्थ से पैदा हुई चुनौतियां हैं, उस माहौल में भारत ने 7.8% की ग्रोथ हासिल करके दिखाई है.
The comment came hours after President Donald Trump doubled down on his defense of his 50% tariff on India. President Trump said in a Truth Social post, America's relations with India have been a one-sided disaster. He added that America was India's biggest client, but Washington sold very little to New Delhi because of high tariffs enacted on American goods. The president also reiterated that India buys most of its oil and military products from Russia and very little from the United States. He also claimed that India had offered to reduce tariffs on U.S. goods to zero, suggesting the alleged offer had come very late. Now, so far, there's been no confirmation from New Delhi on any such offer being made.
What few people understand is that we do very little business with India, but they do a tremendous amount of business with us. In other words, they sell us massive amounts of goods, their biggest client, but we sell them very little, until now a totally one-sided relationship, and it has been for many decades. The reason is that India has charged us, until now, such high tariffs, the most of any country, that our businesses are unable to sell into India. It has been a totally one-sided disaster.
Trump's post came a day after scenes of camaraderie between Indian Prime Minister Modi, Russian President Vladimir Putin, and Chinese President Xi Jinping at the SCO summit. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro described Prime Minister Modi's engagement with Xi Jinping and Putin as a shame. The White House trade czar has frequently criticized New Delhi's continued crude trade with Moscow.
Before Putin invaded Ukraine in February of 2022, India didn't buy Russian oil to speak of. Very, very small amounts. What happened? Well, the Russian refiners went in and got into bed with big oil in India. Putin gives Modi a discount on the crude. They refine it and they ship it to Europe, Africa, and Asia at a big premium, and they make a ton of money. Now, what's wrong with that picture? Well, it fuels the Russian war machine. India is nothing but a laundromat for the Kremlin.
Now, India, of course, has strongly rejected these charges, with the country's oil minister saying that energy trade has complied with global rules and has helped stabilize world markets.
Some critics allege that India has become a laundromat for Russian oil. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Now, President Trump last month imposed a 25% reciprocal tariff on India and an additional 25% as a penalty for buying Russian oil. Still, the countries are in active negotiations attempting to strike a trade deal. India's Commerce Minister said that India is negotiating a bilateral trade agreement with the United States and that talks for a pact have been going on since March.
We already completed Mauritius, Australia's first tranche, the four-nation EFTA bloc, UK, UAE. Lots have happened, lots more to go. But all of the US, we are in dialogue with them for a bilateral trade agreement.
For now, trade tensions remain, but the coming weeks will show if dialogue can pave the way for a more balanced and stable economic partnership. And now turning to South America, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has once again slammed the U.S. government's deployment of warships to the Southern Caribbean. Speaking at a conference with international media in Caracas on Monday, Maduro said his country was at maximum preparedness and ready to respond if attacked by forces Washington has in fact deployed in the region.
Esta rueda de prensa es muy importante.
This press conference is important because Venezuela is facing the greatest threat that the continent has seen in the last 100 years. 8 military ships with 1,200 missiles and a nuclear submarine are targeting Venezuela. It is an extravagant, unjustifiable, immoral, and absolutely criminal, bloody threat. Absolutely criminal.
Y un submarino nuclear apuntan.
Known for his fiery anti-U.S. tirades, Maduro said communication with Washington have broken down and warned if he would constitutionally declare a quote-unquote republic in arms if the U.S. launched an attack.
Submarino nuclear apuntan.
If Venezuela were attacked, it would immediately enter a period of armed struggle in defense of the national territory, in defense of the history and people of Venezuela, and we would constitutionally declare the republic in arms.
Inmediatamente al periodo de lucha armada en defensa del territorio nacional.
Maduro has also warned President Donald Trump that any U.S. military action against Venezuela would, in his words, stain his hands with blood.
8 barcos militares con 1,200.
Mr. President Donald Trump, you must be careful because Marco Rubio wants to stain your hands with blood, South American, Caribbean, Venezuelan blood. They want to drag you into a bloodbath, to tarnish the Trump name forever with a massacre against the Venezuelan people, with a terrible war across South America and the Caribbean.
Y absolutamente criminal, sangrienta.
Now, during the press, Maduro also accused the United States of seeking to topple his regime through the deployment, even as he extended an offer of peace to President Trump.
Nosotros conseguirá siempre.
On a human level, if you asked Nico, that is me, what message I would send to Mr. Donald Trump, President of the United States, I would say, seek peace. In us, you will always find a friendly hand for peace, for development, for independence, for dignity, and with respect. The pursuit of regime change is exhausted and has failed as a policy worldwide.
Cambio de régimen está agotado y está fracasado como política en el mundo.
Now, Maduro's latest comments come at a time when tensions have been at their highest over the deployment, which Washington says aims to address threats from Latin American drug cartels. Reports indicate most seaborne drug traffic to the U.S. moves via the Pacific, not the Atlantic, where the U.S. forces are currently stationed. However, to be clear, the U.S. has not made any threat of invasion, and reports suggest the U.S. Navy has deployed 3 destroyers and 1 cruiser, with 3 amphibious assault ships expected to enter this week. Washington has also reportedly deployed a nuclear-powered submarine and has been flying spy planes in the region to gather intelligence. In response, Venezuela has sent its own warships and drones to patrol the coastline and has also launched a drive to recruit thousands of militia members to bolster its defenses. Speaking about the militias on Monday, Maduro said more than 8 million Venezuelans have enlisted as reservists so far.
Usted tiene que cuidarse.
We have reached a consolidated figure of enlisted militiamen and reservists of 8,200,000 Venezuelans, men and women, who have stepped forward and said, I am ready. 8,200,000 Venezuelans, but remains open.
Trump se manche de sangre por los siglos de los siglos.
Venezuelan foreign minister, citing a United Nations report, reportedly told counterparts in several Latin American countries that the deployment of U.S. maritime forces was built on a quote-unquote false narrative. However, reports indicate that Guyana's President Irfan Ali has welcomed Washington's military deployment, stating that his country would support any measure to eliminate threats to its security and the region. Now, Maduro has been in Donald Trump's crosshairs since the Republicans' first term from 2017 to 2021. More recently, Washington doubled down on the bounty for Maduro's capture to $50 million from $25 million. In addition, his 2024 re-election has been not recognized by the United States or much of the international community. In defending himself, Maduro reportedly insisted on Monday that he was the legitimate winner of last year's presidential election. However, reports have claimed otherwise, alleging that the polls were in fact fraudulent and rigged. So as Venezuela and the United States trade accusations over the deployment, the standoff continues to fuel uncertainty across the Caribbean, with regional security and diplomatic outreach hanging in the balance. And back in the United States, protests swept across several American cities on Labor Day as thousands voiced their opposition to President Donald Trump's decision to deploy National Guard troops and federal immigration agents. From Chicago to Washington, from New York to San Francisco, demonstrators marched with banners, chanted slogans, and sang songs, turning a holiday rooted in workers' rights into a broader statement of political resistance. The largest crowds gathered in Chicago, with organizers estimated between 5,000 and 10,000 participants. The demonstration was part of nearly 1,000 workers over billionaires protests nationwide, but in Chicago, the message was especially sharp. Now, that's because President Trump has threatened to send National Guard troops and federal immigration agents into the Windy City, a move many in the state and city see as federal overreach. Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson joined the marchers and pledged that the city would resist.
Federal troops in the city of Chicago. No militarized force in the city of Chicago. We're going to defend our democracy in the city of Chicago. We're going to protect the humanity of every single person in the city of Chicago.
Protesters expressed fears that the arrival of federal forces could spark violence, even as homicide rates in Chicago have fallen in recent years.
Issues. He's violent. His actions toward people, his action toward workers is tantamount to a crisis that Americans have never seen before. I'm a veteran of the United States Army, and I'll tell you one thing. I did not go to Vietnam to come back to fight for something like this. I'm out here today for all of my retired sisters and brothers who are going to be subjected to walking, dying in the streets because of the lack of the safety net that has been eliminated by Donald Trump and his Doge group.
What scares me the most is that there's not more people out in the streets right now. And every day and every weekend. And I want my weekends back.
And in a bit of breaking news, we're just learning that a judge has ruled that Donald Trump's deployment of National Guard in California has been deemed unlawful. Still, local and state leaders have already prepared to fight any deployment in court if Donald Trump decides to move troops into Chicago. Legal experts say such a move could violate the U.S. Constitution and long-standing laws against using the military for domestic policing. Meanwhile, immigrant rights groups have worked to fortify their defenses by working to hire more attorneys, staffing immigration hotlines, and launching more Know Your Rights training. Mayor Johnson signed an executive order barring city police from working with federal troops or immigration officers. Elsewhere, rallies took place with equal fervor. In New York, crowds gathered outside Trump Tower chanting, "Trump must go now," and carrying signs denouncing what they called a fascist regime. Large gatherings also took place in Washington, D.C., and protesters took to the streets in San Francisco and other West Coast cities. Labor Day has often been a moment to spotlight workers, but this year it became a platform for testing the balance of power between federal authority and city leadership. With Trump's threat still hanging over Chicago and lawsuits likely to continue to follow, this fight will certainly test the limits of executive power right in the communities and neighborhoods of millions of Americans. Air travel today depends on satellites orbiting thousands of kilometers above the Earth, guiding aircraft through busy skies with pinpoint accuracy. But when those signals are tampered with, even the most sophisticated jets can be left vulnerable. That risk came into sharp focus this week when European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's plane faced a suspected jamming incident over Bulgaria. Bulgarian authorities have pointed to Russia, although the Kremlin has denied any involvement. The episode has once again raised questions over passenger safety and Europe's broader security landscape. Here's the story with more.
Modern aviation relies on an invisible network of satellite signals to navigate safely through crowded airspace. Those satellites guide everything from commercial jets to military planes to presidential aircraft. But on Sunday, that system was disrupted for the plane of European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen as it approached the city of Plovdiv in southern Bulgaria. Officials say the aircraft suffered what they call GPS jamming, when stronger radio signals overpower satellite transmissions, leaving pilots without their usual navigation tools. The European Commission confirmed the incident on Monday, saying Bulgaria suspects blatant interference by Russia.
We can indeed confirm that there was GPS jamming, but the plane landed safely in Bulgaria. We have received information from the Bulgarian authorities that they suspect that this was due to blatant interference by Russia.
The European Commission President's flight landed after pilots switched to ground-based navigation aids. She was traveling from Warsaw as part of a tour of 7 frontline EU states, including Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, Romania, and Bulgaria. According to reports, the aircraft circled the airport for nearly an hour before touching down manually, reportedly relying on analog paper maps. Bulgaria's Civil Aviation Authority confirmed the GPS signal was neutralized, forcing controllers to provide alternative landing guidance. However, the Kremlin reportedly denied the allegation. Bulgaria's Air Traffic Services Authority has noted more cases of jamming and spoofing since Russia-Ukraine conflict began in 2022. Tens of thousands of incidents have been reported by airlines around the Baltic coast in the last few years. Besides, Western officials have also accused Moscow and its proxies of dozens of disruptive acts, including vandalism, arson, and attempted assassinations. Countries bordering Russia, including Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, have warned of increased Russian electronic interference affecting flights, ships, and drones. Last year, Estonia accused Moscow of jamming GPS in Baltic airspace. In March 2024, a Royal Air Force plane carrying the UK's then Defence Secretary Grant Shapps reported a similar spoofing incident. Experts warn that while aircraft have multiple backup systems, persistent jamming can raise the risk of collisions or navigation errors. The EU's Defense Commissioner says the bloc will deploy more low-orbit satellites to strengthen detection of interference.
Jamming and spoofing harms our air, maritime, and transport economies. We will increase satellites in low Earth orbit for robustness, and we will enhance interference detection.
The EU Defense Commissioner's remarks underscore wider security concerns as Western powers weigh how to guarantee Ukraine's safety in the event of a truce in the 3.5-year war. Despite the disruption, the European Commission President's plane left Plovdiv without incident later that day. The safe departure from Bulgaria closed the immediate scare. But the interference has left European officials facing a broader question: how to protect critical air traffic from future disruptions.
And finally, the world's largest food company has fired its CEO after just 1 year in charge, citing a secret romance with a direct subordinate. The chocolate giant says it acted immediately after an external investigation confirmed the relationship. But the Nestle CEO is hardly the first top executive to tumble from the corner office over personal choices. From McDonald's and Boeing to Starbucks and even viral moments caught on camera, CEOs keep proving that power, perks, and sometimes passion can land them in very, very public trouble. Our final story has the latest.
It seems love in the workplace comes with a very expensive price tag, especially if you are the boss. Swiss food giant Nestlé has shown its chief executive, Laurent Fréchy, the door after just 1 year on the job because he failed to disclose a romantic relationship with a direct subordinate. The company behind Kit Kats and Nespresso said the dismissal was immediate. It was the result of an internal probe followed by an external investigation that confirmed the affair. Nestlé chairman Paul Bulck didn't mince words and stated that this was a necessary decision. He further added that Nestlé's values and governance are strong foundations of the company. Laurent Fréchy now joins the not-so-exclusive club of CEOs who learned the hard way that boardrooms don't double as dating apps. The biggest and the latest example of CEO's romance gone wrong is astronomer CEO Andy Byron and his chief people officer. They were caught getting cozy on a Coldplay kiss cam in July 2025, which later went viral across the globe. Resignations of both swiftly followed, along with a million memes on social media. Remember McDonald's Steve Easterbrook? Fired in 2019 for one consensual relationship, only for a second investigation to dig up 3 more. He walked away with $105 million at fire, only to return it later and cough up a $400,000 fine. Or Boeing's Harry Stonecipher, who lost his job in 2005 after an affair with a subordinate Deborah Peabody, which violated the company's code of conduct. Although the investigation done by the company found that the affair had no impact on business operations, Peabody's career, or company resources. Even outside the C-suite, reputational hazards are real. Just ask Poland's Peter Navarro, the CEO of a paving firm, who was shamed worldwide after snatching a tennis players had intended for a child at the US Open. He later apologized. This too went viral almost as fast as the snatch itself. Meanwhile, Starbucks boss Brian Niccol in 2024 was roasted brutally for commuting 1,600 kilometers by corporate jet from his home in California and the company's Seattle office. He also caved in and bought a house near the office. Apparently, latte loyalty doesn't stretch to climate sins. In Nestlé's case, the scandal is more boardroom than ballgame. But the lesson rings the same. Corporate leaders live under a microscope. The chocolate may melt in your mouth, but for Laurent Fréchy, it all melted a little too quickly in the heat of the workplace romance.
That's our show for today. From all of us here at Firstpost America, we certainly thank you for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you right back here again tomorrow. Thanks everyone for watching.